tourists. They are wrong. The truth, as with most unsettling tales, is far more disturbing. It resides in a dimly lit room within the walls of a historic museum. There, encased in glass, sits Robert the doll. Dressed in a sailor suit, clutching a small stuffed lion, he seems harmless at first glance. But look closer. Observe the eyes, those black, beady eyes that seem to follow your every move. Listen closely, and you might just hear the faintest whisper, a chilling sound that seems to emanate from the doll itself. A single word, barely audible yet laced with an unspoken menace. Beware. Robert's story is not one of childhood innocence, but of darkness and despair. It's a tale of a young boy, a gift received, and a bond forged in something far more sinister than friendship. It's about the slow, creeping realization that some toys are not meant for play. They are vessels of something ancient, something malevolent, something that watches and waits. For those who dare to dismiss the legend, the consequences can be dire. Accidents, misfortunes, whispers in the dead of night, these are the hallmarks of Robert's wrath. He is a silent observer, a collector of transgressions, waiting for the moment to unleash his own unique brand of vengeance, and he never forgets a slight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished wooden floors of the East Martello Museum. Tourists, eager for Key West's haunted history, trickled in. For Sophia, a bright-eyed young woman, today was special. It was her first day as a museum intern. Her heart pounded as she navigated the corridors. The air hummed with untold stories and secrets. Her orientation had been brief, a whirlwind tour of dusty exhibits and hushed warnings, and then she was led to him, Robert. He sat in his glass case, a solitary figure amidst forgotten toys and faded photographs. The sailor suit, once vibrant, was now washed out. The stuffed lion, missing an eye, slumped against his side. Sophia's hand trembled as she traced the outline of the case. There was a strange energy emanating from the doll, sending shivers down her spine. The air around him seemed to crackle with an unseen force, whispering on the edge of her senses.
Don't even think about touching the glass, dear.
Sophia turned to find Mrs. Hemingway, the senior curator, her gaze sharp and unwavering. The older woman's face, etched with the passage of time, held a wealth of unspoken stories, her eyes reflecting a lifetime spent guarding the museum's secrets.
He doesn't like to be disrespected, and trust me, dear, you don't want to be on the receiving end of his displeasure.
She handed Sophia a feather duster and a spray bottle filled with a solution that smelled vaguely of lemon and lavender. Sophia nodded, her pulse quickening. She felt a strange mix of fear and fascination as she set about her task. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the clinking of Sophia's cleaning supplies. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced nervously at Robert, expecting to see his head turn, but he remained still, his gaze fixed on a distant point. The longer Sophia stayed, the more convinced she became that there was something more to this doll, something ancient and hungry lurked beneath the surface. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself drawn back to Robert's room. The museum, with its hushed corridors, became my sanctuary. I felt a strange sense of peace amidst the artifacts, but it was Robert who held me captive, his presence both unsettling and comforting. My initial apprehension gave way to insatiable curiosity. I devoured every scrap of information about the doll. Old newspaper clippings spoke of strange occurrences surrounding Robert. Local legends painted him as a harbinger of misfortune, a malevolent entity trapped within a child's plaything. Sophia discovered that Robert had once belonged to a young boy named Eugene Otto, the son of a wealthy Key West family. According to local lore, the doll had been a birthday gift, given to Eugene by a disgruntled servant who practiced dark magic. The boy, it was said, had become inseparable from his new companion, often talking to the doll as if it were alive. The whispers spoke of strange accidents that befell those who dared to cross Eugene or mock his beloved doll. Furniture overturned, objects disappearing and reappearing in impossible places, voices heard whispering in the dead of night. These were the hallmarks of Robert's wrath, or so the stories claimed. Sophia's dreams became haunted by images of Robert. She would wake in a cold sweat, the feeling of his unseen eyes upon her lingering long after the dream had faded. In these nocturnal visions, Robert was no longer a mere doll, but something more sinister, his painted smile taking on a menacing quality. One particularly vivid dream found Sophia back in the museum, standing before Robert's glass case. But this time, the doll was no longer inert. Its head turned slowly, those black beady eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. And then, a voice, barely audible yet as clear as a bell, seemed to emanate from the doll itself.
"Heed the warnings, child," the voice whispered, its tone laced with a chilling sadness. "He is not what he seems. Turn back before it's too late."
Sophia jolted awake, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was dark, the only sound the gentle hum of the air conditioner. But the dream lingered, its warning echoing in the silence. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Sophia's once comforting routines now felt tainted, her senses on high alert for any sign, any indication that the doll's influence was reaching beyond the confines of its glass case. The museum, once a place of quiet contemplation, now pressed in on her, its shadows seeming to writhe and twist at the edge of her vision. The air, heavy with the scent of dust and decay, crackled with a strange energy. It was as if the very walls themselves were watching her, their silence pregnant with unspoken threats. Sophia felt a constant prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the unsettling feeling of unseen eyes following her every move. Sleep, once a refuge, became a torment. Sophia's dreams were plagued by vivid nightmares. She would wake in the dead of night, her sheets twisted around her, her heart pounding against her ribs. The darkness pulsed with unseen menace, the silence filled with whispers. Her phone became a source of dread. Calls would drop without warning, replaced by bursts of static. And then, there were the whispers. Faint, disembodied voices from the receiver, whispering her name, taunting her. Section 3. A Haunting Melody. One evening, as Sophia sat alone in her apartment, attempting to lose herself in a book, a sound pierced the silence. It was a child's laughter, high-pitched and filled with a chilling glee. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the rooms, bouncing off the walls. Sophia's blood ran cold. She lived alone, her apartment building eerily silent at this hour. The laughter continued, rising in intensity, morphing into a haunting melody that seemed to seep into her very bones. It was a sound that spoke of something ancient and evil, something that reveled in her terror. Section 4. Sanity's Fragile Thread. Driven to the brink, her nerves frayed, Sophia began to question her own sanity. Was she losing her grip on reality, succumbing to the insidious whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air she breathed? Or was something far more sinister at play? Something that had followed her home from the museum, something tethered to the malevolent presence that resided within Robert's glass cage. The line between reason and madness blurred. Sophia found herself talking back to the whispers, engaging in hushed conversations with the shadows that danced at the edge of her vision. Her once ordered world had descended into a terrifying chaos, a waking nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Section 1. The Taunt. The museum felt different that day. The air hung heavier, thick with an unseen energy that crackled along Sophia's skin. Even the tourists seemed to move with a subdued haste, their voices hushed as if in deference to an unseen presence. Sophia's steps were leaden as she made her way to Robert's room, drawn by a force she couldn't comprehend. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes fell upon the doll. He seemed different somehow, larger, more menacing. The painted smile on his porcelain face seemed to mock her, his black eyes burning with an eerie intensity. A wave of anger, sudden and fierce, washed over Sophia. "It's just a doll," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the words rang hollow even to her own ears. She couldn't shake the feeling of standing on the precipice of something terrible. Doubt warred with fear, and Sophia considered fleeing, but the need to understand was too strong. Stepping closer to the glass case, her heart pounding, Sophia met the doll's gaze with defiance. "You're nothing," she spat. "Just a child's toy. You have no power over me." A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the single bulb that illuminated the doll's case. Sophia gasped, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The temperature plummeted, the air growing heavy and oppressive. She was plunged into absolute darkness, the silence broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. Panic welled up inside her, choking her, threatening to consume her. She fumbled for her phone, desperate for the reassurance of its light, but her trembling fingers found only empty air. It was then that she heard it, a soft, shuffling sound coming from the direction of the doll's case. A primal fear, raw and instinctive, seized Sophia. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't tear her gaze from the spot where she knew the doll stood, shrouded in darkness. The shuffling grew louder, closer, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. And then a pair of eyes, glowing with an eerie, malevolent light, pierced the darkness, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. The growl intensified, morphing into a guttural voice that rasped against the silence.
"You should not have done that, Sophia," the voice hissed, its tone laced with a chilling amusement. "You have no idea what you've awakened."
Sophia didn't wait to hear more. She didn't need to. The malevolence from the darkness where Robert stood was all the confirmation she needed. Turning on her heel, she fled, her fear lending speed to her steps. She didn't dare look back until she burst out of the museum doors into the sun-drenched street. The warmth of the sun did little to dispel the chill in her bones. Sophia's carefully constructed world, her rational mind, her very sense of self, all of it had crumbled around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. She had peered into the abyss, and the abyss had peered back. And in that moment, she knew with a certainty that defied logic or reason that Robert was real, his power undeniable, his reach extending far beyond the confines of his glass case. The thought of returning to the museum, of facing that room, that doll, filled her with a terror so profound that it stole her breath. Her dreams, her sanity, her very life, all of it felt tainted, poisoned by the unseen force that she had unwittingly unleashed. Her resignation from the museum was swift, almost frantic. She couldn't bring herself to speak of the events that had transpired, couldn't bear the thought of reliving that night of terror. Instead, she mumbled something about a family emergency, her voice trembling, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if she expected Robert to materialize from the shadows. Sophia vowed never to speak of Robert again, to bury the memory of that night deep within the recesses of her mind. She moved to a new city, tried to rebuild her life, tried to convince herself that it had all been a bad dream, a figment of a sleep-deprived, overactive imagination. But the shadows of that night lingered. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following her every move. She avoided antique shops, shuddered at the sight of porcelain dolls, flinched at every creak and groan of her old apartment building. And in her dreams, Robert was waiting. His painted smile, once innocuous, now seemed to mock her, his black eyes burning with an eerie, knowing light. He was a constant, chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and some nightmares, once awakened, never truly sleep.